Imagine for a moment the sound. It is not a scream, nor a cry for help. It is a dry, rhythmic grinding, the sound of rough flint scraping against the hardest bone in the human body. You are wide awake. You are strapped down to a cold slab of rock. There is no anesthesia to numb the nerves, no morphine to dull the edges of reality. You can feel the pressure mounting on your forehead. You can smell the copper scent of your own blood, mixing with the dust of your shaved scalp. A figure stands over you, a shaman whose hands are stained with the dried blood of the patient who came before you. He's not trying to kill you. In his mind, he's saving you. He's carving a hole into your living skull to let the demons out. For thousands of years, this was not torture. This was medicine. And for the patient lying on that rock, the pounding in their head was about to be replaced by an agony far, far worse: the headache. It is perhaps the most universal human affliction. A throbbing behind the eyes, a tightening of the temples. For us today, it is a minor inconvenience solved by a small white pill and a glass of water. But rewind the clock. 500 years, 2,000 years, 10,000 years. To our ancestors, a migraine was not a vascular event. It was a curse. It was a spirit trapped within the bone cage of the skull clawing to get out. It was the wrath of a god. And to fight a god, ancient doctors resorted to measures that defy our modern comprehension. From the sun-scorched sands of Egypt to the dark, plague-ridden alleys of medieval London, the quest to cure the headache has left a trail of bodies. It is a history written in mercury, arsenic, electric eels, and the saw. This is not just the story of medical ignorance. It is a journey into the desperation of the human condition. This is the horrifying history of headache treatments that civilization tried to bury. To understand the beginning of this nightmare, we must go back to the Stone Age. Before the wheel, before writing, before cities, there was the hole. Archaeologists call it trepanation. It is the oldest surgical procedure known to mankind, and the evidence is undeniable. We have found thousands of skulls from the burial grounds of Peru to the caves of France bearing the signature marks of this brutal practice. But why? Why would a Neolithic healer take a sharp stone and bore through the skull of a living tribesman? The prevailing theory is one of spiritual warfare. In a world without science, pain was a physical entity. If a warrior fell to the ground, clutching his head, screaming in agony from what we might now call a cluster headache or epilepsy, the tribe saw only one thing: possession. The demon was inside, and the skull was the prison. The logic was terrifyingly simple. To free the victim, you must break the prison walls. The tools varied by region, but they were all equally primitive. In the Pacific, they used sharpened shells. In Europe, they used flint. In the Americas, they used obsidian volcanic glass, sharper than any modern steel scalpel, but brittle and unforgiving. The method was crude. Sometimes they would drill. Other times, they would scrape layer by agonizing layer, until the dura mater, the membrane covering the brain, was exposed to the open air. But here is the most shocking part, the part that keeps historians awake at night. Most of these patients survived. The skulls tell the truth. We see smooth, rounded edges around the holes. That is the sign of bone healing. That means the patient lived for years, perhaps decades, with a window into their brain. Imagine the resilience required to endure that. Imagine the pain threshold. To sit still while your skull is breached, to survive the inevitable infection without antibiotics, and to walk away. However, not all were so lucky. For many, the cure was a death sentence. If the shaman cut too deep, piercing the meninges, the brain would swell. Infection would rot the mind from the inside out. The patient would descend into a fever dream of delirium seizures and finally silence. The headache was gone, but so was the life. Yet as humanity moved out of the caves and into the great civilizations, the treatments didn't get better. They got stranger, and they got deadlier. As we transitioned from the Stone Age to the golden sands of the ancient empires, the brutality became organized. It became systematic, and it involved creatures that belong in a nightmare, not a hospital. Under the blinding sun of ancient Egypt, medicine was indistinguishable from magic. The physicians of the pharaohs were priests, first healers second. To them, a splitting headache was not a biological malfunction. It was the result of a malicious entity entering through the nose or ears. And to drive it out, they turned to the river. The Nile was the giver of life, but it was also home to monsters. One of the most peculiar treatments found in the Ebers Papyrus A medical scroll dating back to 1500 BC involved a ritual that sounds like fevered madness to modern ears. The physician would fashion a crocodile out of clay. Into this effigy, they would bake grain and herbs, possibly lead or dung. This heavy, gritty idol was then bound tightly to the patient's head using linen strips. The symbolism was potent. They were invoking the power of Sobek, the crocodile god, hoping his ferocity would devour the demon causing the pain. Imagine lying in the sweltering heat, your head pounding with a migraine, while a heavy clay statue is strapped to your skull, the weight of it pressing down, crushing the very spot that throbs with agony. They believed the pressure was the god fighting the sickness. But if the gods refused to answer, the Egyptians turned to fire. Cauterization was a standard practice. If the pain was deep inside, they believed they had to draw it to the surface. They would take metal rods, heat them until they glowed a menacing orange, and press them against the skin of the temples or the back of the neck. The smell of singing hair and burning flesh was the scent of healing. They were literally trying to burn the pain away, replacing an internal ache with an external searing scar. As power shifted across the Mediterranean to the great empires of Greece and Rome, the approach to headaches became less about clay idols and more about the raw forces of nature. But do not mistake this for progress. The Roman cure for a chronic migraine is perhaps one of the most terrifyingly creative therapies in human history. It involved a creature from the depths, the torpedo fish, also known as the electric ray. Long before the invention of the battery or the discovery of electricity, Roman physicians like Scribonius Largus stumbled upon a shocking phenomenon. They found that this flat, slimy bottom dweller could deliver a numbing jolt to anyone foolish enough to touch it. To the Roman mind, this wasn't electricity. It was a potent, invisible venom that could stun the senses. And so the prescription was written. If a patient suffered from an unyielding headache, they were taken to the shoreline. The physician would produce a live thrashing electric ray. The instructions were simple and horrifying. The patient was told to place the wet living animal directly onto their forehead. Imagine the sensation, the cold mucus slick skin of a sea creature slapping against your feverish brow. And then the strike. The torpedo fish can discharge up to 200 volts of electricity. The jolt would have been instantaneous and violent. It would arc through the skull, causing the eyes to flash with white light, the teeth to clench involuntarily, and the muscles of the face to spasm in a rictus of shock. The patient would often be knocked unconscious. When they woke up groggy and disoriented, the headache was often gone, obliterated by the sheer trauma to the nervous system. It was the ancient equivalent of electroconvulsive therapy, administered not by a machine, but by a monster. But as the Roman Empire collapsed and the world plunged into the Dark Ages, the knowledge of the electric fish was lost. In its place, a new, darker theory of medicine took hold, a theory that would dominate Europe for 1,000 years and lead to the spilling of oceans of blood. They called it the doctrine of the humors. And for anyone with a headache, it meant that the problem wasn't demons and it wasn't the nerves. It was the blood itself. And the only way to cure the pain was to drain the life out of the patient drop by crimson drop. The logic of the humors was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its practice. Medieval physicians believed the body was a container of 4 fluids: blood phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. A pounding headache was interpreted as a plethora, an excess of blood rushing to the brain, pressing against the skull, like steam in a sealed pot. To save the patient, the doctor had to open the valve. They had to spill the blood. Enter the leech. In the damp candlelit chambers of the sick, these parasitic worms became the surgeon's primary tool. But for a severe migraine, they did not just place them on the arm or leg. No, the aim was to draw blood as close to the source of pain as possible. Patients were instructed to lie back as the physician applied the cold, slimy creatures directly to the temples, forming a crown of feeding worms around the forehead. But it got worse. If the pain was behind the eyes, the leeches were placed inside the nostrils. For a headache rooted in the jaw, they were placed inside the mouth onto the gums. Imagine the sensation of a parasite latching onto the sensitive mucous membranes inside your nose, slowly expanding as it gorged itself on your life essence, growing heavy and warm against your face. But for the most blinding migraines, leeches were too slow. The pressure had to be released immediately. This required the lancet or the fleam. This was the golden age of the barber surgeon men who wielded razors with the casual confidence of a butcher. The procedure was called venesection. For a headache, they would often target the jugular vein in the neck or the temporal artery on the side of the forehead. The physician would slice the vein open, and the blood would arc into a brass basin held beneath the chin. The sound of the blood hitting the metal, a steady rhythmic drumming, was the soundtrack of medieval medicine. They would let it flow until the patient's lips turned blue, until their vision blurred, and they swooned into unconsciousness. This fainting was considered a success. It meant the pressure was gone. The fact that the patient was now suffering from acute blood loss and shock was irrelevant. Across the sea, in the Islamic Golden Age, medicine was more advanced, yet the treatments for chronic headaches remained brutally invasive. The renowned surgeon Albucasis described a method that makes bloodletting seem almost gentle. He suggested that for certain types of headaches, the pain was trapped under the skin. The solution was to make a deep incision into the temple, but he didn't stop there. To prevent the wound from healing too quickly and to draw out the evil vapors, he would pack the open slice of meat with garlic salt or harsh irritants. The wound was then bandaged tightly, deliberately kept inflamed and festering, forcing the body to reject the foreign matter and theoretically the pain along with it. If the knife and the leech failed, the medieval doctors returned to the fire. Cauterization saw a resurgence, but with a religious fervor. Using a tool called a trephine, a hand-crank drill that looked more like a corkscrew, they would bore into the skull just as their Stone Age ancestors did. But now they often combined it with holy relics. Dust scraped from the shrines of saints would be mixed with wine and poured directly into the exposed brain tissue. It was a macabre cocktail of faith and surgery. By the time the Renaissance arrived, humanity began to trade superstition for chemistry. But this did not bring relief. It brought a new kind of horror. As the world entered the age of exploration and industry, the cures for headaches shifted from the physical removal of blood to the chemical destruction of the mind. The age of poisons had begun. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the brutality of the knife was replaced by the insidious quiet of the apothecary's bottle. Science had identified the elements of the earth, but it had not yet learned their dangers. For the aristocrats of Europe suffering from blinding migraines, the cure was often a heavy metallic liquid known as quicksilver. Mercury. It was prescribed liberally, often mixed into pills called blue mass. Doctors believed its weight would force the humors into balance. They were wrong. Mercury is a neurotoxin. It does not heal, it erodes. Patients would take their medicine and the headache might subside, but soon a new horror would set in. Their teeth would loosen and fall out. Their gums would bleed black blood. Their limbs would tremble uncontrollably, and their minds would unravel into paranoia and madness. They were rotting from the inside out. The cure was a slow, agonizing suicide sold to them by the most respected men of science. But even the slow death of Mercury pales in comparison to the swift, mechanical horror of the 20th century. This is the darkest chapter, the moment when medicine decided that if it could not fix the pain in the head, it would simply disconnect the person from the pain. Enter the ice pick. In the 1940s, a neurologist named Walter Freeman popularized a procedure known as the transorbital lobotomy. It was marketed as a miracle cure for everything from depression to chronic, intractable headaches. The procedure was shockingly simple. It required no operating theater, no scrubs, and often no anesthesia, other than a series of electroshocks to render the patient unconscious. The doctor would take a long, sharp metal instrument resembling an ice pick and slide it under the patient's upper eyelid, pressing it against the thin layer of bone at the back of the eye socket. With a small hammer, he would tap the end of the pick. Tap, tap, crack. The instrument would breach the bone and enter the frontal lobe of the brain. The doctor would then sweep the pick back and forth, severing the delicate white matter that connects the emotional centers of the brain to the intellect. For the patient, the headache was gone. But so was everything else. They woke up as empty shells. They could walk, they could talk, but the spark of humanity was extinguished. They were docile, indifferent, and hollow. The lobotomy didn't cure the headache. It simply destroyed the part of the brain capable of caring about it. It created living zombies in the name of medical progress. Thousands of people, men, women, and even children were subjected to this mutilation before the medical community finally recoiled in horror. So look at the medicine cabinet in your bathroom. Look at the small white pill you take without a second thought when you feel that familiar pressure behind your eyes. We live in a golden age of relief, but we must never forget the cost of this comfort. We stand on a mountain of skulls, Skulls drilled by flint, burned by iron, shocked by eels, and shattered by ice picks. The history of the headache is a history of human desperation. It reminds us that when pain is great enough, we will agree to anything, endure anything, and believe in anything to make it stop. The ghosts of those patients are still with us, silent witnesses to the agony we have left behind. Next time your head begins to throb, remember them, and be thankful that the only thing you have to swallow is a pill. But the horror did not end with the knife, the leech, or the lobotomy. There was another path taken by the desperate, a path that leads us into the darkest recesses of human taboo. When the drill failed and the bloodletting proved useless, the doctors of the 16th and 17th centuries turned to a treatment so grotesque it defies belief. They believed that to cure the head of the living, one must consume the body of the dead. They called it corpse medicine. For a wealthy aristocrat in Victorian England or Renaissance France, suffering from a splitting migraine, the prescription might be a substance known as mumia. This was not a metaphor. It was the ground-up flesh of ancient Egyptian mummies, looted from the tombs of the Nile, shipped to Europe, and pulverized into a brown, bitter powder. Physicians believed that the preserved flesh of the ancients held a spiritual potency, a life force that could stop the pounding in the skull. Imagine dissolving the dust of a 3,000-year-old human being into a glass of wine and drinking it believing the death of another would bring life to you. But as demand grew, mummies became scarce. So the doctors turned to fresher sources. For the King of England, Charles II, who suffered from severe ailments, the remedy was a mixture known as the King's Drops. The primary ingredient, human skull. But not just any skull. It had to be the skull of a man who had died a violent death. The theory was that a sudden violent death trapped the soul's energy within the bone. Grave robbers scourged the cemeteries. Executioners became medical suppliers. They would take the skulls of hanged men, crush them into a fine powder, and mix them with alcohol. Patients would ingest this bone broth, hoping the vitality of the executed criminal would strengthen their own failing bodies. And if the bone was not enough, there was the moss. A specific fungus known as usnea was highly prized for curing headaches. But this moss could not be harvested from trees or stones. It had to be scraped from the skull of a corpse that had been left exposing to the elements. The image is singular in its horror, a doctor scraping green fuzz from the rotting brow of a skeleton, bottling it, and selling it as a premium cure for a migraine. They were literally eating the decay of death to soothe the pain of life. Even in the realm of non-consumptive cures, the methods were brutal. In the 19th century, before the full understanding of blood pressure, some doctors advocated for counter-irritation. The logic was that you could distract the body from the headache by creating a greater pain elsewhere. Patients were blistered with acid behind the ears. They had setons, thick threads made of silk or horsehair, threaded through the skin of the back of the neck. The doctor would pull the thread back and forth daily like a saw to keep the wound open and oozing pus. The constant gnawing agony of the neck wound was intended to make the patient forget the throbbing in their head. And in a twisted way, it worked. The pain didn't leave, it just moved. But beyond the blood, the bone dust, and the burnt flesh, there's a horror that is harder to quantify. It is the horror of the mind. Imagine the psychological toll of being a patient in these times. You are in pain, a pain so severe, it feels as if a demon is crushing your skull. You turn to the most learned men in your society, the keepers of wisdom, and they offer you only more pain. You are strapped down, you are cut open, you are fed the remains of the dead. And when these treatments fail, as they often did, you are told it is your fault. You are told your faith is weak, that the demons are too strong, or that your humors are hopelessly corrupted. The history of the headache is not just a catalog of gruesome surgeries, it is a testament to the absolute loneliness of suffering. In the flickering candlelight of a medieval bedroom surrounded by the smell of sickness and vinegar, the sufferer was alone in a way we can scarcely imagine. There was no relief, only the choice between the agony of the disease and the agony of the cure. And perhaps the most terrifying realization is that these doctors were not monsters. They were not sadists. They were desperate men trying to help. The trepanner drilling into the skull believed he was releasing a spirit. The doctor applying the hot iron believed he was diverting the humors. The tragedy lies in their sincerity. It is a chilling reminder that the road to hell is paved with the best of intentions, and that for thousands of years, the pursuit of healing was indistinguishable from the practice of torture. We look back at these practices with a sense of safety. We view the trephine skulls in museums and the rusty surgical tools in glass cases with a detached curiosity. We tell ourselves that we have escaped the dark ages. We have MRI machines, neurosurgery, and pharmacology. We understand the brain, or do we? It is easy to judge the past with the clarity of the present. But we must ask ourselves a comfortable question. What practices of today will the historians of the future look back on with horror? In 500 years, will they look at our use of radiation, our chemotherapy, our reliance on opioids and shudder, just as we shudder at the leech and the lancet? Will they call us barbarians for cutting into the body at all? The history of medicine is a history of error. It is a slow, stumbling climb out of the dark over a mountain of mistakes. The headache, that simple, common throbbing behind the eyes, has been the catalyst for some of the most gruesome experiments in human history. It has driven us to drill, to burn, to poison, and to electrify. It proves that the human drive to escape pain is stronger than the fear of death itself. So the next time you feel that familiar tightening in your temples, the next time the light becomes too bright and the world becomes too loud, take a moment. Pause before you reach for the medicine cabinet. Feel the pulse of your own blood. Listen to the silence. And remember the millions who came before you. Remember the sound of the flint against the bone. Remember the taste of the mercury. Remember the silence of the lobotomy. We stand on their shoulders. We survive on their suffering. The nightmare is over for us, but the echoes of their screams still linger in the pages of history, reminding us of the thin, fragile line between a cure and a curse. But sometimes, the threat did not come from the sharp edge of a knife or the cold touch of a corpse. It came from the deceptive beauty of the earth itself. In the search for relief from the pounding in their heads, humanity turned to the garden. They found flowers that bloomed with vibrant colors and sweet scents, promising a gentle sleep. But these plants were liars. They were the silent killers of the botanical world. Consider the case of the deadly nightshade, known beautifully as Atropa belladonna. In ancient and medieval times, herbalists believed that the headache was a sign of excessive excitement in the brain. To calm it, they needed a depressant. They would distill the juices of the nightshade berries and administer them to the suffering. The plant contains atropine, a potent toxin that attacks the nervous system. The patient would indeed feel the pain recede, but it was often replaced by a terrifying delirium. Historical accounts describe patients falling into a state of waking sleep. They would hallucinate vivid, often demonic visions. They would picket invisible threads in the air, converse with people who weren't there, and lose the ability to distinguish reality from nightmare. The headache might have been numbed, but the mind was set on fire. The dosage was a game of Russian roulette. A few drops too many, and the patient's heart would simply stop. They died in a state of confused terror, killed by the very medicine meant to soothe them. And then there was the poppy, opium. For centuries, it was the gold standard for pain relief. In the fog-choked streets of Victorian London, you could walk into an apothecary and buy laudanum, a tincture of opium dissolved in alcohol, cheaper than you could buy gin. It was marketed as a cure-all for everything, especially the nervous headaches of women. Mothers gave it to crying infants. Men drank it to numb the stress of the Industrial Revolution. But the relief of opium came with a heavy price, the slavery of addiction. The headache would vanish, replaced by a warm, floating euphoria. But as the drug wore off, the pain would return with a vengeance, accompanied by nausea, shaking, and a craving that clawed at the soul. Doctors were creating a generation of addicts, turning functional members of society into ghosts, haunting the opium dens, chasing a relief that was slowly eating them alive. The cure for the headache became the destruction of the will. As the calendar turned to the 20th century, the gardens of poison were replaced by the laboratories of physics. Science had discovered a new, invisible power, radiation. And in the early 1900s, before the Geiger counter clicked, with warning, radiation was not seen as a danger. It was seen as the elixir of life. Radium. The word itself sounded like the future. It glowed in the dark with a soft, ethereal blue light. Doctors and entrepreneurs rushed to bottle this liquid sunshine. They believed that the energy emitted by radium could stimulate the cells, clear the blood, and yes, cure the most stubborn chronic headaches. Imagine walking into a pharmacy in 1920 and buying a bottle of Radithor. It was simply water infused with radium salts. It was expensive, marketed to the wealthy elite as the ultimate cure for fatigue and pain. Patients would drink it daily, feeling a placebo effect of vigor, unaware that they were swallowing a nuclear reactor. The horror of this treatment is best illustrated by the tragedy of Eben Byers, a wealthy American industrialist. Suffering from persistent pain, he drank nearly 1/400 bottles of Radithor over several years. At first he praised it. He said his headaches were gone, his energy restored. But radium is a mimic. Chemically, it resembles calcium. The body, tricked by this resemblance, absorbs the radium and deposits it directly into the bones. Slowly, silently, Eben Byers became radioactive from the inside out. The energy didn't heal him, it shattered his DNA. The first sign was not a return of the headache, but the loosening of his teeth. Then his jaw began to ache with a new deep ferocity. When doctors finally examined him, they were horrified. The radium had eaten his bones away. His jawbone literally disintegrated. Holes appeared in his skull. His brain was being bombarded by radiation from his own skeleton. He died a gruesome, agonizing death, his body so radioactive that he had to be buried in a lead-lined coffin. The treatment for his minor aches had turned him into a biological hazard. It serves as a grim reminder that just because a treatment is modern, just because it is backed by the science of the day, does not mean it is safe. We often embrace the new with a blind optimism, forgetting that nature has forces we are not meant to consume. But perhaps the most claustrophobic nightmare in the history of headache treatments belongs to the sufferers of the great pox syphilis. Before antibiotics, syphilis was a sentence of slow decay, and one of its hallmarks was a headache of indescribable intensity. Patients described it as if their skull was being crushed by a vice, or as if bony tumors were growing inward, piercing the brain. To combat this, Renaissance doctors devised the fumigation box. It looked like a medieval torture device, and in many ways it was. The patient was stripped naked and placed inside a large wooden cabinet, with only their head sticking out of a hole in the top. Inside the box at the bottom, the doctor placed a brazier of hot coals. On top of these coals, they threw cinnabar, a red mineral form of mercury. As the mercury burned, it released thick, toxic, silvery vapor. The patient was effectively steam-cooked in poison. The theory was that the patient needed to sweat out the disease. They would sit in the sweltering heat, their skin absorbing the mercury fumes, their lungs inhaling the leakage. The side effects were immediate and grotesque. The mercury caused salivation. The body would produce pints of saliva, a day drooling uncontrollably. The gums would rot, the teeth would fall out, and the breath would smell of death. But the psychological horror of the box is what lingers. Imagine being locked in a wooden coffin, unable to move while the air around you fills with a heavy metallic fog. You are sweating, choking, and poisoning yourself, praying that the agony in your bones stops before your heart does. Many patients died right there in the box, suffocated by the very cure that promised them salvation. These stories, the poppy, the radium, the mercury oven, they are not just historical footnotes. They are chapters in the same book, the book of human fragility. They remind us that the brain, the seat of our consciousness, is also the seat of our greatest vulnerability. The headache is a unique form of torture because it happens inside the fortress of the self. You cannot run from it, you cannot amputate it, it is you. And because it is inescapable, we have been willing to do the unthinkable to silence it. We have trusted charlatans and geniuses alike. We have swallowed light and breathed fire. We have turned our bodies into chemical dumping grounds. So as we close the book on this horrifying history, ask yourself, what is the price of a pain-free life? Today we worry about the side effects of aspirin or the long-term impact of screens on our eyes. But look at where we came from. We survived the drill. We survived the poison. We survived the ignorance of our own healers. The next time you feel that throb, that pulse of pain behind your eye, respect it. It is an echo of a struggle that has lasted for 10,000 years. It connects you to the Neolithic man in the cave, the Egyptian in the sand, and the Victorian in the smog. You are part of a long lineage of survivors who endured the worst that medicine had to offer. And you, thankfully, are the one who gets to live to tell the tale. The ghosts are silent now, but their lesson remains. In the war against pain, the battlefield is the human body and the casualties were us.